So the Supreme Court has once again decided to bare its fangs and show us that it is incredibly corrupt. So what I have in front of me is an article from AP News. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about two stories, one in a little bit more depth than the other, but both of the stories are incredibly potent. I'm just really going to breeze over the both of them, but it's to make the point that there's a big problem with the Supreme Court, and something needs to be done about it much sooner than later, because this spells doom for democracy and honestly the state of this country in general. So this article from the AP talks about how the 6-3 conservative court upholds state voting restrictions. So I'll read you a little bit of the article and I'll tell you a little bit of the specifics of the restrictions that were upheld. So, flexing its new strength, the Supreme Court's conservative majority on Thursday cut back on a landmark voting rights law in a decision likely to help Republican states fight challenges to voting restrictions they put in place following last year's elections. The court's 6-3 ruling upheld voting limits in Arizona that a lower court had found discriminatory under the Federal Voting Rights Act. It was the High Court's second major decision in 8 years that civil rights groups and liberal dissenting justices say weakened the civil rights era law that was intended to eradicate discrimination in voting. The decision fueled new calls from Democrats to pass federal legislation blocking the Senate Republicans that would counter the new state laws. Some lawmakers and liberal groups also favor Supreme Court changes that include expanding the 9-justice bench. The court's decision, harmful as it is, does not limit Congress's ability to repair the damage done today. It puts the burden back on Congress to restore the voting rights to its intended strength, President Joe Biden said in a statement. And I kind of just want to stop there. So what he says here, and I hate it when he does this, and he does this so often, Joe Biden does, is he'll come out to an issue and he'll say, it just puts more pressure on Congress. Congress has to do something. He doesn't directly call for Congress to do something. He doesn't say, like, oh, I'm going to make sure this gets done. He just says, like, hey, Congress has a harder job now. It's such an indictment on what everyone said that he would be. It really is. So just a little bit of the specifics to what these new restrictions do. These specific laws, they shorten the time that the polls are open. Let's just stop right there for a second. There are people that will tell you that these Republican-led states aren't passing restrictive voting laws. And some of the laws that they're passing include provisions such as this one, shortening the time the polls are open. Why are you doing that? How is that not restrictive? You're shortening the time that the polls are open? Why? So less people can turn out? Right, because when there's less of a turnout, the Republican is more likely to win. Let's proceed. Both on election day and the day before, the times are shortened. And this is specific to Arizona right here. They imposed new prerequisites to voting by mail. They are attacking mail-in voting because that was a big thing that they thought was a contributor to the fraud election narrative. And they're shortening the windows to apply for and return mail ballots. They make it harder to register to vote and easier to purge voters from the rolls. Two laws even ban handing out food or water to voters standing in line. Now, why would you need to do that? Don't you want voters comfortable when they're going to go vote to cast the ballot? Apparently not. So they did this, and the end result was a 6-3 vote. Of course, there's 6 conservatives, there's 3 Democrats. It was along partisan lines. And I just want to remind you, in case you forgot, 3 of those justices, those conservative justices, were appointed by Donald Trump. I'm pretty sure it's 3 of them. And the one in particular, Amy Coney Barrett, I remember it was this big story when Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed. And I hope you guys know the story. I don't want to rehash it, about what happened when the Democrats tried to get a Supreme Court justice implemented and the Republicans delayed it. And then when it came for Amy Coney Barrett's time, the Democrats could have basically did the same thing, but they didn't. They just let her get on the Supreme Court with like no fight whatsoever. And everybody was just dumbfounded, like, what are you doing? But it's so indicative of the weak Democrats to allow that to happen. Okay, so that's the first story. So they did this, And a story that's even more harrowing is that they upheld child slavery. So this is an article from BBC that details the following. 6 African men allege that they were trafficked from Mali and forced to work on cocoa farms in Ivory Coast. The group say both companies perpetuated that slave trade to keep cocoa prices low. The court ruled 8-1 that the group had no standing because the abuse happened outside the U.S. But it stopped short of a definitive ruling in whether the Alien Tort Act, an 18th century law, could be used to hold U.S. companies to account for labor abuses committed in their supply chains abroad. About 70% of the world's cocoa is produced in West Africa, and much of this is exported to America. It's estimated that 1.56 million children work on cocoa farms in Ivory Coast and Ghana, according to a report published by the U.S. Department of Labor last year. In their lawsuit, the group of men alleged that they were forced to work on the cocoa farms for 12 to 14 hours a day. They also said they were kept under armed guard while they slept in order to prevent them from escaping and were paid little beyond basic food. While decrying child slavery, the companies argued the case should instead be made against the traffickers and the farmers who kept them in such conditions. So essentially what's happening here is that this group of men, they were involved in child slavery and they invoked a lawsuit. And the response from the Supreme Court and the corporations that were involved in this is that, oh, well, the specific child slavery, it didn't happen in the U.S., but the corporations are stationed in the U.S. It's in the response from the corporations is, oh, well, we didn't specifically do it. It's the manufacturers that we're dealing with. Whose fault is that? Whose fault is it for crafting such trade policies with individuals that would engage in these practices? I mean, the technicalities that they're using to deny these men justice for child slavery is absolutely insane. And this child slavery is still going on. In fact, it's more rampant than it was now back then when these men had to go through it. But the ultimate decision is, and the fact that you need to know, is that the Supreme Court upheld child slavery. They sided with the corporations on a case in child slavery. They sided with corporations versus siding with the men in the child slavery. Corruption at its finest. And something really needs to be done about this, but I don't think anything will. And this wasn't even among partisan lines. As I said previously, this was 8-1. So this is just rank corruption right here. And I don't know who that one person is that seemingly has a soul. I probably need to find that out, but it was 8-1. We really need to crack down on these corporations, man. You're basically saying that these entities have unlimited power and influence, and they can do whatever they want. And these are the people, these same corporations, I think it was Cargill and Nestle, they bought our government. They own a lot of our politicians, most of them, in fact. These are the people whose wishes and ideologies get implemented in the laws that you see passed on a daily basis because the politicians do the bidding of these corporations. We need to publicly fund elections. We need to get money out of politics, man. The Supreme Court has been so bad for so long, and something needs to be done about it. You need to enact term limits. You need to pack the court. You got to do something about it because things like this can't persist. To the voting laws, to the child slavery, they're wrong on almost every single issue. And they're incredibly corrupt. I'm humble enough to admit what exactly needs to be done is above the current knowledge that I possess. But I'm sure there is someone out there that is much more intelligent than I that can come up with an adequate solution on how to deal with these corrupt, moral lacking people.